Why is it now possible that in a Western democracy such as Australia, which supposedly values free speech, that it is now acceptable for a major media platform like Sky News to be banned because of what is deemed as misinformation? Some feel it is purely because they dare to go against the prescribed views that are status quo. Why is there suddenly only one acceptable viewpoint and no discussion is now permitted? Have we lost the ability to think critically and reason what is correct information versus fake news?
Damien Kay.
You know, I mean, I think that this act of killing a bunch of videos or removing them from YouTube is really a difficult thing. I think there are times when misinformation needs to be stamped out and where it's damaging and dangerous for society. But in this case, you have a private company that's removing videos, most of which were from a year ago, without a whole lot of transparency as to why they're doing it. And, you know, it's a slippery slope when you kind of allow this to remove. And I keep thinking of historians. When they want to recreate the conversation and the myths and the arguments and the disagreements that happened in that moment, because these are now videos that are pretty old, they're not going to have access to that. And are we better off because of that? I'm not sure we are.
Is there also a question here, Damien, of the media's right to voice opinions, to have dissenting views, for those dissenting views, even if they're unpopular, to be challenged with the facts, to be brought into, you know, the light of proper debate and argument, but not to be silenced?
Well, I do think that's important. I mean, the challenge with these tech companies, though, is it's not an even marketplace of ideas. You have algorithms that are going to be pumping out misinformation if that's what people want, that are going to be favoring outrage over context. And so I think the responsibility on these tech companies is different than it is just on a traditional media company, frankly. But I also think it's questionable to remove anything like that. And what I think the culture really needs is for these companies to be more transparent and for there to be an open process. And maybe we need to think of them as utilities as opposed to private companies.
So if they had a more open process, would you be happier? Because the way I look at it is this: there is no such thing as unfettered free speech. You know, if people say things that are truly harmful, either to individuals or to groups or to broader social outcomes, there's a question to be had. So for you, is it just about the process? You want a fairer process before material is removed?
I think it's important that the process is there, and I think you have the ability to then publicly debate whether or not it's correct or not, or why. I mean, my concern is how arbitrary is it? Why is this video being removed and not that video?
And what are the criteria? What are the benchmarks?
Exactly.
But also in this case, Kate, is, let's talk about Alan Jones, for example, as one of the videos here that have been removed. Entitled to a dissenting view, to say that there is alarmism, to challenge, to question some of the numbers. I mean, one of the things that we have seen throughout COVID is that often the dissenting view has been silenced or marginalised, and we don't have a much more open debate. Are they not entitled to have those views?
Look, I think, you know, I come back to what I say. In the end, I don't believe in unfettered free speech. You know, I think there's got to be, you've got to have some kind of system around it. I think the point that Damien makes is, well, what's the system and can we discuss that? I think what happens when you have the discussion is people start to say, well, people should be allowed to say that, rather than kind of say, well, what's the kind of framework? You know, coming out of this whole thing, for me, there's a few things you've got to think about. So one is our relationship with the state. You know, that's what, that's where I really think the issue is. You know, if we're going into, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous times, and what the pandemic has shown us is really the state is the only machine that can respond. I mean, private companies can't respond in the way that individual states have to this. So as we move into more volatile times, the state and the state machinery, to me, is going to become more and more important. So how do you build a relationship of trust between individuals and the state? So when you move into more complex areas, we can trust what they're saying. We believe what they're saying. You know, that there's people are taught around both sort of media literacy, health literacy, all the things that underpin, how you come out of these kind of problems.
Julia, if I get a thought from you, when you look at something like this as a health professional, you listen to what's reported on Sky News, you listen to what's reported elsewhere. Are you in favour of removing different broadcasters from various platforms, removing people from YouTube?
No, my reasons are kind of strategic. So I look at this, in the pointy end being with vaccination, where there's a lot of concern about negative media, social media, scaring people off vaccination. But the research that we do with people who don't vaccinate doesn't have in their stories an account of them seeing something on Facebook and it putting them off. It's much more complex than that. And I think when we think about the influence of misinformation in particular, we need to think about the environment in which that misinformation sets seed. And if there's mistrust, if there's a lack of justice in the way people are treated around in healthcare or around vaccination, for example, if there's an adverse event following immunisation, then people can be more attracted to those messages.
And that's what we've seen throughout COVID, questions about trust.